for an avoidant and for men in general, it's very difficult to take on anything that they don't feel that they're good at already. Men want to be good at things. So if you feel as a masculine that you're going to do something where you again might seem weak or vulnerable or like you're not in your, confident mastery, it's like you usually just don't go there because it means so many things to you and makes you feel like really insecure.
You are listening to the Perspective Podcast. This is a space for you who are longing to come back home, deeper into your own center and your own truth. This is a space for you who are longing to deepen the relationship to yourself and to others. My name is Madeleine Mofjärd, and in this space I invite you to explore conversations that in different ways touches upon the human experience. And I'm here to invite new perspectives. So, hi and welcome, Johann Urb, to the Perspective Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. It's so wonderful. I got like a short house tour on Zoom before pressing play, and I feel, yeah, it made me feel closer to you. So it feels like we're in the same space, but on Zoom.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the colors that are going on. We have a little bit of brown and white happening here.
Yeah, it's matching. So my intention and my longing to sit down with you today is to sort of dive into your perspectives on relationships, intimacy, how we can sort of explore the depths of relating.
Mhm.
And I'm so curious where we will sort of end up in the conversation today. But before diving into in anything today, how is your heart? How is the experience of being Joanne today?
I am doing good today. Yeah, and this topic that we are going to dive into is so close to my heart because I come from a background of being an avoidant, textbook avoidant, and really not having access to my own heart, and then not allowing other people to access my heart. And so today I live in a place where I feel that my heart is so available. And so if you ask me how I am, it's like I feel like I'm living in this constant bliss, this bliss of feeling life and being grateful to be alive, and like and the my ability to perceive and experience the majesty and the beauty of life is so much more expanded because I've made space in my heart, for my heart to receive it and to open it. So I'm doing really amazing.
That's lovely to hear. And I feel like when you share those words, it rings so true in me because what I can see from like what I've seen by following you on Instagram and hearing your story many times on other interviews and other medias and now watching you on the screen, it's such a like light shining from you. So it's inspiring to see and follow your journey at a distance. And I think it's yeah, it sounds very true. It feels very true what you're sharing.
Thank you.
For the people who doesn't know you at all, do you think there's anything that is good for them to know about you before diving into the conversation? It might be like what you're doing for a living, but it could also be like anything else that
Yeah.
might be good for them.
Yeah, well, for me, my journey with spirituality started at a pretty young age. I was living I'm from Estonia originally. I grew up in Finland, and I always lead with this because it's important to understand. I felt very alone as a teenager and was very depressed, and really felt very shut down. And so, what I'm really passionate about sharing in the world today is my journey from there to where I am now. And the spiritual component has been such a huge part of it, which is having a personal practice and the value of it. Because so many of us in today's world are just constantly focusing what's out there, you know, because the world is so interesting and we have all these incredible devices and we're always looking for that fulfillment outside of ourselves, and we've forgotten that there's it's all actually in here. No matter how many things you have or how many things you've done or you own, you're not going to get that sense of fulfillment unless you really have that connection with yourself and what I believe is the divine that resides within. And so for me, that is what I'm really passionate about is sharing with folks out there, with people, the easy and fun and, if you will, addictive ways and how to connect with yourself and the divine. And I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure everyone who's been on this journey knows that, is when you touch that place and you open that place and you cultivate that place and you water that garden, life just gets better and better forever and ever, which is a mantra that I didn't even know about until just a few years ago. And so I just want our audience to know that life can get better and better forever and ever. Get on that path, find the practices, find the tools. And when we live from that place that, that depressed teenager that I was suicidal and was so afraid and so alone and so, couldn't wait to get out of this body to experience what I thought what love was. Now I'm so grateful to be in this body and to be here and to experience the gift of this life. And so that's you know what I want to talk about essentially, and or would love to share with the world. And I'm grateful that I am doing it with the world. Feel like I'm living my dharma, and it's just awesome.
Love it. And when it comes to you as a man, as a human being, as a person, do you think there are any sort of misconceptions about you?
Mm, probably.
Maybe it's hard to know, but
I mean, I've lived so many different lives, if you will. I've lived in so many different countries and different cities and places, and I've got to reinvent myself a lot. I think that maybe because of the way that I look, people may project onto me a certain idea of how my life has been. I've heard from different people that, oh, because you're, white guy, you're tall, you're this, you're that, you must have had a really easy life. And it wasn't so. And it's through the hardships and through the challenges and the difficulties that I think we really learn the most. And so oftentimes, if people just see an image of me, they might think that I'm not a very kind person or an open person or a person who is, even spiritual, if you will. But then I'm always joyous to give people a different experience of me when we meet or when they get to taste some of the practices that I share with the world.
mm, yes. And you are also the founder of the Art of Co-Devotional Love, right?
Mhm.
Am I
Yes.
pronouncing it right? I'm curious to hear you share like what is sort of the foundation of that method or whatever you want to call it. Would you like to share and how it came to be? How did it become
Yeah. So
birthed?
this all comes back to, again, me being a textbook avoidant, experiencing quite a bit of trauma as a child, and not having a very close relationship with my mother, and then therefore not trusting the feminine. And we have this part of our brain called the reticular activating system, which basically confirms everything that we believe in the world. It's constantly looking for that feedback that this is true, our belief is true. And so it's so, so important for us to realize that whatever we believe, we basically confirm. And so my journey and the journey to the art of co-devotional love has been how to rewire my brain and how to rewire my soft tissue, the somatic part of my being, in such a way that I can again receive and give love and experience love in a profound way. And for me and Rachel, my wife, who was one of my greatest teachers, that we really stumbled into this because we didn't have the tools to communicate or to repair or to alchemize the traumas and the ruptures and the contractions that happen in every relationship. And so this method was born out of that curiosity of how can we do this better? How can we meet the rupture and the inevitable contraction with skill and with excitement and with gratitude, knowing that it's actually leading us to deeper connection, deeper intimacy, to profound realizations. And so we got really, really curious about what are the best tools out there? What are the best teachers out there? And we started studying them. And then through that, realized that some of the things that we had already been using are basically just universal tools, something that I believe everyone would at a certain point arrive at just by trying and practicing. So these tools are very universal. I also really want to give a lot of credit to the giants that came before us, whose shoulders we stand upon, like Gay Hendricks, like Esther Perel, um, Harville Hendricks. There's so many incredible teachers out there that have laid this foundation of what we now utilize in our own method is co-devotional communication. So we utilized a lot of different people for their genius, if you will, and then put together a thing that really worked for us. And then also putting our own tools in there and created this tool set that we find very, very, very effective and easy and fun to utilize. And again, seeing with our private clients and seeing with our students all over the world how incredibly well it works in creating harmony and repair and then also thriving in a relationship. So that's what really it's all about. And once again, I couldn't recommend this enough because when you apply these tools, you get to live a life where you're fully expressed. And I believe that what stands between true intimacy in a relationship are those parts of us that we don't feel that we can fully express, that we're really ashamed of or really afraid of. And when we don't express those parts, they will always win and rule because they will, even if they seem small or insignificant, they're there and they're there and your partner knows they're there because this is 5%, this is 95%, and then the body can feel everything. And so, yeah, it's just a way to be fully expressed and to embrace the conflict and embrace the rupture and celebrate it. And through that, then thrive and drop deeper and deeper into layers of intimacy and connection and love and passion and experience that are so mind-bogglingly delicious that I just wish them upon everyone to experience.
Mm, I love it. And I heard you mention the word fun, and I think it's so beautiful also because I think it's so common in this world of like personal development and relational work that it tends to get so sort of deep, of course, but also that the deepness comes with a sort of seriousness. And I think that element that you're sharing, like the joy, the funness, the juiciness, it's so important. And we can do this work. Of course, it's gonna get deep and it's gonna get serious, but how can we also sort of invite the funness and the joy and the pleasure in it. So I think that's beautiful. And I heard you mention how Rachel, your wife, has been your biggest teacher and is your biggest teacher. And I'm curious if you would like to share, like, what would you say is the biggest lessons, one of the biggest lessons maybe that she has taught you over the years?
Yeah, there's so much there, so many lessons. And I want to just touch on that what you just spoke to, which is playfulness is so important. When we are playing, we are learning so much more and with such greater ease. And so it's important, again, for our audience out there to really apply this is whatever practices you're doing, make sure that you're actually enjoying doing them because there are so many practices out there and not every practice will work for everyone, but find the ones that you can create a lot of joy with because you're going to want to do them again and again and again. And so it's vital that you're having fun, that you don't become this serious, very serious spiritual person who's really like takes themselves so seriously and life so seriously. It's so boring. And it's like not fun. And so why do that if you can make it actually fun? But to Rachel and the lessons, Rachel for me if I can describe Rachel in one word or maybe two words, it would be she's relentless love. And she has this ability to meet most moments with deep, profound love instead of going into the head or going into, needing to be right or needing to blame, shame, or guilt somebody. She's able to meet it with love. And it's so incredibly powerful when that happens. And the other thing that she is does so well is that she's able to apologize and own when she has made a mistake,
Mm.
which is a huge, huge part of co-devotion. The art of co-devotional love is owning our stuff, right? When we're in an argument or in a rupture, there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blaming. You did this to me, and you're wrong, and I'm right, and it's going both ways, right? But when we begin to own and take responsibility, it's so much easier to then the other person to feel heard and received. And Rachel is a master at this. I'm still learning, by the way.
It's a journey.
but but it makes, always learning, never stop learning. And so it's so much easier to meet the moment and meet the challenge of the moment when both people are taking responsibility and owning 100% whatever is occurring inside of them. And this is one of the greatest tools for us to learn, is to go like, hey, I take 100% responsibility and own that a part of me is really triggered right now, right?
Mm.
It's so easy for your partner or whoever you're with to then be like, oh wow, amazing, okay, I want to hear more about this, versus this is where you messed up and this is how you are a terrible person, yeah.
Mm. And that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm curious also to dive deeper into, you mentioned how you come from the more avoidant attachment style.
Mhm.
Would you like to share something about like maybe um, of course, you're sharing the openness and the aliveness and the experiences that you have today in your life, but where do you sort of come from in that attachment style? How has that affected your relationships earlier? Had you started the journey when you met Rachel, or is this a work that has been happening in the relationship with her? Or yeah, if you would like to share some.
Yeah, so once again, the childhood traumas really make us, I think, give us our attachment style, And for me, I remember when I was listening to the book, Attachment Theory, and this was only maybe like 8 years ago or something. I was, I literally felt like somebody went inside of my brain and wrote verbatim what the thought process is. I was like, how is this possible? How did these authors go inside of my brain? And then you realize that, wow, that's not just me, that's so many other people out there. I'm curious, what is your attachment style?
I come from the more avoidant, no, I'm anxious attachment style.
Anxious. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would say
And
I'm more
so,
secure now, but that's where I come from. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and as you know, usually attachment, I mean, the avoidant and the anxious like find each other, and it's
Perfect match.
oh my God. It's called the shit show. And so, yeah, I really struggled with intimacy. Intimacy was my biggest fear. And my relationships were a reflection of that. So, no one could ever feel truly close to me, or I would just, if things got intense, I would pull my love away. I would essentially shut down and wouldn't be able to even feel myself and feel my heart. And again, like I didn't have any of these words. I didn't know how to explain what I now know was happening. And so it was really, really difficult because it just felt like, what is, this is just who I am. This is just how I am. And this is how it's always going to be, because you don't have the awareness of the tools. You don't know any better. And so many people are struggling with this because this is not part of our education system. So you really have to look for this. You have to search this out. And then for me, what it took therapy. It took the willingness to really understand that I was the common denominator. I was into my 30s and realizing, wow, I keep creating the same thing over and over and over again. It must not be all the other people. It must be me. And it takes a certain level of maturity to get there. Some folks get there a lot faster than I did. I'm very stubborn, and also was pretty traumatized. And then it was this slow unraveling or slow peeling the layers, as I felt safer and safer. And it wasn't until Rachel came along when I was 36 that I would say that the real journey began, because she's a secure attachment style, and she was able to really not get so triggered by my avoidance, and also call me out and call me forward in a way that wasn't she basically stood there. She stood in love when I was shutting down or going into my avoidant patterns or going into blaming or whatever I was doing. And then I realized, oh wow, like she's the center and I'm dancing around doing all these things. But it took years, years. And bless her, her patience, her perseverance. Like I said, relentless love is what it took. And then on my part, the willingness to continually to show up, and also to seek help. And in our big ruptures, we had support, without which I don't think we would have made it through. Which is again so vital and so important for people to know, because I grew up with the idea that only crazy people go to therapy. I'm not crazy. Why would I need to go to therapy for, and that's the story I was making up, versus realizing, wow, therapy is so vital and important for us to really be able to see our blind spots and to consolidate our shadows. And it's very difficult if it's just you and your partner, for your partner to be your therapist, because it's sometimes very difficult to receive that from your partner. But when it's an outside source, authority figure, someone who's skilled, it's so much easier to receive it. And so now, because of our journey, able to serve in this way, our clients and our students, it's such a gift and such an honor. And then to witness people transform and come out of their avoidant patternings into a secure, it's it's orgasmic for me, because I know what they're now able to experience, and how that little boy or little girl, who was so afraid, it makes me emotional to talk about, is able to now
Mm.
experience so much love and connection and intimacy. It's like, it's all of our birthright, it feels like, and when we are robbed of it, it's so sad.
Mm. Yeah. I think a pattern that I'm noticing, and I'm not sure I'm right, but it feels like, generally speaking, there are more men having an avoidant attachment. And I'm not sure, I haven't sort of read any statistics on this, but in my experience, it feels like there are more men with avoidant attachment. Um, do you think, because I'm curious, um, I'm not sure I have made up my mind on what I believe about this this fact, so I'm asking you, do you
Yeah.
think there's a correlation between sort of, like, if we lift in the feminine and the masculine, so not men and women, but the feminine and the masculine energies, do you think there's a correlation between like avoidant attachment and sort of core traits of the masculine, or do you think there's any sort of
I
correlation
think
between the
it's a
two?
great question. I think it is related, because from a pretty young age, men are told to man up and to not feel, essentially. Your job is to go out there and provide. Your job is not to get emotional and not to share your feelings. No one wants to hear about it. Be a man, suck it up, and keep going. And so therefore, and if you get punched in the face, don't you cry? Don't you share any, you know, I grew up with the belief, which I think a lot of men grow up with, which is vulnerability equals weakness. And how can you be, available with your emotions, which is what intimacy requires, and vulnerable, if you now believe that vulnerability is actually weakness, versus vulnerability is the greatest strength and courage. And again, I think men equate vulnerability with being a victim. So weakness, victim, I'm not strong, it's not powerful. Versus vulnerability takes so much courage. is actually such a strength when we lead with vulnerability powerfully. We're not from a victim, but actually sharing how we're feeling and then being exposed and open. But it's not very much celebrated in our current culture in the world. When you think of a masculine, you think of somebody, or most people would think of somebody who's, just a tough dude or, like strong person. We don't equate strength with vulnerability. And like I said, it actually is the most strong, the most powerful because you're being authentic, you're being real.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting, like what's the norms and what's attachment and what's yeah, it's a sort of a mishmash of everything. I think in my work, I connect with a lot of women who are dating avoidant partners, mostly men. And I find there that a lot of women want to get their avoidant man to sort of get on the journey. To
Yeah,
to awaken, to do the work, to
yeah,
expand, to get to a similar point where you are at, for example. Um, do you have any advice for these women? Because my experience is that it doesn't work. We cannot get
yeah,
someone else to do the journey. But as an from your perspective, then, from having experienced the path of having this avoidant attachment to opening up, do you have any sort of, I don't know if it's advice for the women, but if we have a partner that we want to inspire to open up to see what we see, sort of, do you have any perspectives for those
yes.
people?
I do, and I mean, there's a lot there, and and I feel for all of you women out there who are, or anyone who's dealing with an avoidant partner. It's hard. It's not easy. It's some of the hardest, also the most rewarding work you'll ever do. And for it's multi-layered for an avoidant and for men in general. It's very difficult to take on anything that they don't feel that they're good at already. Men want to be good at things. So if you feel as a masculine that you're going to do something where you again might seem weak or vulnerable or like you're not in your confident mastery, it's like you usually just don't go there because it means so many things to you and makes you feel like really insecure. So how can we empower men? How can we tell the man that actually doing this type of work is sexy? It's beautiful. It's incredible. How can we celebrate men and appreciate men even for the smallest little steps that they're willing to take? But even before we get to that point, what would be useful for a man would be to experience something that shatters your known universe, your understanding of your identity and who you are. And this, you could achieve this with breath work, with deep breath work, can take you to these places where your identity literally just goes away and you at first you might be really scared and you're like, whoa, what just happened? Who am I? I don't even know who I am right now. And those like the little moments of realizing that you're not your identity, you're not your story. And who am I then if that's the case, right? Breath work is one of the safest, easiest, most effective ways to get there. Psychedelics, super, super. For me, I did mushrooms, double hero dose for the first time when I was 16, and it radically changed my life. Radically, radically, radically. I helped with my depression. We have all these studies now. The best universities in the world saying the same thing, which is these are basically the best tools for battling depression and they're effective, they're long lasting, they work. So if it's in your wheelhouse, I would highly recommend doing a ritual, doing a ceremony, maybe doing something like ayahuasca or a mushroom ceremony, even doing things like MDMA in an environment that is sacred and set up for connection versus just you're at a rave, is so profound and powerful because you then I remember first, when I first did MDMA, I was like, oh my God, you can feel this way? This is possible? What? How is this possible? That I can say to someone, I love you, and they can say, I love you to me, and I can receive it. That was the
Mm.
first time I ever experienced that. So, and then what are the things, the practices that you can bring into your life, again, that are fun? So we have a daily gratitude practice that we do that is fun, that is playful, that we both want to do. We have a daily breath practice, pyramid breath, where in just a few minutes, you don't have to go for hours. In just a few minutes, you can reach that place of, where the DMT drops, where you're no longer your identity, you're no longer your story. Your whole nervous system relaxes. And then you go, oh, that's right, you know? And then other practices that are useful, like journaling, like exercise, for example, intense exercise, envisioning your life in a different way, creating different belief systems. All of these practical tools that are also, like I said, fun and easy are the ways to get guys to experience themselves in another way. And once they do, they'll get more curious about what you have to say, and then to be celebrated for the little steps.
Oh, I think that's so important to really sort of honor the steps on the journey. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of like the blaming game or like, yeah, why don't you sort of energy. So I think that's so
Yeah, and
important.
leading by example, without pushing someone, but really like holding the energy, and then leaving the door open, the invitation open, and then also getting curious about what is exciting for the masculine. Because some of the practices that the feminine likes are not going to be right away practices that the masculine will feel attracted to. So, what are the practices that the masculine is attracted to that are going to change his state? And then finding like novel, cool ways to bring those in. I think you can be like sneaky in a not in a sneaky way. Sneaky is not the right word, but like get creative, I would say, in a way that you can bring in these practices and expose your man to experiences that allow him to open,
Mm.
where he doesn't feel scared or he doesn't feel overwhelming, and baby steps.
Mm. Do you have any examples of practices that could be more sort of attuned to the feminine or practices that would be more aligning for the masculine, generally speaking, of course?
Yeah. So, for example, if you want to do something very masculine, you do something like Wim Hof breath. It's a very masculine practice. And when you think of Wim Hof, you think of ice baths, you think about dudes hiking in their underwear in the snow, doing push-ups. And with that practice, you can reach deep states of connection with the divine, with yourself. And when guys that are very masculine, when they think about Wim Hof or Aubrey Marcus or, these guys that are really Joe Rogans, they're like, oh, these guys are doing that. Great. Let me give it a go. And it may seem much more attractive versus to the feminine. It might be more of you know, a sensual practice that's like pyramid breath. What I love about pyramid breath is like it has a lot of range. But pyramid breath is definitely for the masculine in the beginning, can be a bit more confronting because we're making sounds and we're shaking. And, so when you first look at it as a guy, you go like, whoa, I don't know about that. That seems way too vulnerable or it's way too exposing or whatever else. I just want to do push-ups, pull-ups, and, fast breaths. So it's understanding the what delights the masculine and the feminine, and then just cherry picking those things as a gateway, as a portal, as a bridge into this path. Once you've stepped onto it, once you really enjoy the feeling that you get, then you get curious about more. And Tantra is also a really interesting path because, most men like sex. So, as do women, by the way, as we all know. But Tantra is a really interesting way also because it's like, ooh, it's sexuality. And, within Tantra, there's so much more than sexuality. So if your man is interested in a tantric expression, You know, we love our teacher. There's her name is Ma Nanda Sarita, and she has a tantra school that we find is very clean energy and very fun, playful, also very profound and confronting. But like it's a beautiful way into aspects of yourself that um, are, you know, again, will radically shift your life if you're just willing to take that path.
Mm, lovely. Thank you for sharing.
Mm.
I want to go back to something that I heard you share in the beginning of the conversation, which was something about how you have previously in your life not been trusting the feminine. Is that something you want to talk about or share anything? Like, how has that sort of played out, this sort of lack of a trust for the feminine?
Mm. Yeah, so I definitely had that majorly where I had made up a stories around the feminine not being trustable, essentially that, you know, women are emotional, women are not as smart as men, women are cannot be trusted to hold a secret or cannot be trusted to do what they say, or women don't have honor, you know. And it's interesting because I don't know if you're familiar with Alison Armstrong's work, which I highly recommend to everyone. She's incredible. And she talks about that, like women don't have honor in the same way that men do, but it doesn't mean that the women can't fully be trusted. And so for me, the journey really, Rachel was the person who shifted everything for me. Even though looking back now, I see that some of my greatest teachers, most of my greatest teachers in this life have been women. And even though they were women at the time and blessed their patience with me, you know, I still didn't trust. I was like, oh, they're women. I don't know if I can fully, you know, integrate everything they're saying is coming from a woman, you know, and then realizing and tying back to where does this all come from? Comes from the relationship with my mother. It comes from what my father was saying. It comes from, you know, these maybe other authority figures that were masculine that had created these narratives and these stories, and seeing how much again all of that holds in how much value you give it versus your lived experience. And in my lived experience, especially once I started to see my own patterns and take responsibility, the feminine was so trustable. The feminine stood in love, even when, you know, I was willing to bounce or to leave or to when I took my love away, the feminine was the holder of love. And for me, also understanding then in my 30s, and this is when the download of pyramid breath came through, is I began to relate to the divine as feminine. And that for me was, I would say, the biggest shift. Understanding for myself that whether I was relating to the divine was this masculine force, masculine energy that felt very sterile in a lot of ways, very stillness and, you know, just like rigid in a way. And versus the feminine divinity, which is creation and play and movement and sound and art and color and nature, and, you know, and when I embraced that divinity, I was like, oh, this is always changing, this is always transforming, this is always creating as well as destructing. And I got to release this rigid or fearful of the changing element part of myself and really relax into that everything is always transforming and changing. And when I embrace that, um, and began to really appreciate and celebrate that, everything shifted for me.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. So powerful. And I think I've heard you mention in other interviews or context, you have talked so beautifully about this idea of like how we as human beings sort of die so many deaths of who we have been in order to expand into the new versions of us or of ourselves. And I think It's such a beautiful metaphor to use those words that I've heard you use to describe it. And I'm curious when it comes to the context of relationship, because I find that to be very common, like the sort of challenge when we do die those deaths within the relationship, and we get birthed into these new versions of ourselves within the relationship. How do we sort of tune in with our partner or keep that expansion going even as we yeah, become new versions of ourselves, if you sort of get what I mean with that
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah. The most important thing is to understand that that is part of the journey. That there isn't, the narrative is everything, right? The story that we tell ourselves is everything. And for a lot of us, the story that we tell ourselves is a story that somebody else has told us, and we just repeat it. And a lot of the story that we've gotten from, books or movies or wherever is that when you're in a relationship, when you find your person, when it's right, it's just going to be good. And it's just going to be rainbows and butterflies, and you ride off to the sunset, and that's it. But we don't ever see like what's later down the line. We just have this idea and this image versus realizing that that's not how life works at all. In order for there to be expansion, there has to be contraction. In order for there to be life, there has to be death. They're linked together. And so when we can experience, or when we can bring this expression into our awareness and go like, wow, so each contraction, each rupture is here for me and for us. Each death leads to another rebirth. And when we build this into our narrative and we build it into a belief system, then we can embrace these moments with gratitude, with curiosity, and actually know that this is happening for us, not to us. You're not doing this to me. I'm not doing this to you. This is the universe or the divine orchestrating this for us, or we are orchestrating this for ourselves so we can grow and learn and expand and get into deeper intimacy. And that is, I believe, the biggest thing. And then it's like, how do we meet the moment? Learning the skills and the tools to meet the moment with more grace, so that when the blood leaves the brain and goes into the limbs and we are in our fight or flight or faint, how do we know that this is happening, and then how can we bring the blood back into the brain so we can actually think and be compassionate and not just become animals essentially, right? And just go into our trauma pattern and have that repeat, repeat, repeat. So that, I believe, is the biggest thing, is creating a new narrative and then educating ourselves with the tools of how to meet the moment in such a way that you kind of almost get excited when it happens. Rachel and I now, it sucks every time. Don't get me wrong. It sucks every time. We're like, oh man, we're in it right now. And then we bring in the awareness of, oh, this is happening for us. This right now, what we're experiencing is our next course, or our, this little piece that we get to share with our students and with our clients. And it keeps us humble. It doesn't, it's like when you have that awareness, you're extracting the gold, right? Going like, wow, where is this? How can we do this differently? Or what's, where's the magic here? Why is this happening for us? Because it's happening for us. So where's the thing? And then you discover it and you're grateful for it and you can celebrate it. And then you're no longer afraid, and you no longer avoid when you see it coming, or even when it blindsides you. You're like, oh, here it is. All right, let's get into it. Let's roll up the sleeves, and it radically changes your life because you're just not afraid.
Mm. I think that's such a beautiful sort of reminder, because in my experience, since like I shared, I come from the more anxious attachment style. So for me, like when it comes to conflict or disruption in relationships, it's been so scary for me to really sort of, because the narrative for me has been that when conflict arises, that means something will end.
Right.
So to for me that has been so transformative to change that narrative into conflict, exactly what you mentioned. It's here for us. It will take us closer. It will sort of expand the relationship even more. It's such a beautiful reminder that the narrative that we hold is everything. And also by daring to go into those moments of hardship, we can also expand so much. So I think it's yeah, so
And
important.
for myself, the analogy that I like to use, because this is what it felt like to me, is when you go through a death into a rebirth, and it's always a death of identity of who we think we are, who we think we're not. And when you are on the other side of it and you look back, and you, for me, it's like it feels like I'm a snail in a shell. And then I've way outgrown the shell, but somehow I still was squeezed in there. And then you, when you're on the other side, you look back and you go like, that shell was this big. It's tiny. How could I live in that thing? And as life does, then you kind of do another shell, or and then you die a death again. You go like, how did I ever fit into that thing? And it's this thing that keeps happening and happening. And so it's important when we look back at our life, especially if we've lived long enough, to go like, wow, I can recognize the pattern, and actually how necessary these ruptures have been. Without these ruptures, I wouldn't be half the person I am today. And if those ruptures have impacted you negatively, made you feel more anxious, or smaller, or more traumatized, it's so important and vital to seek help, and help from people who have been through similar things and have experienced it differently, the outcome differently. Because you can, at any moment in your life, just by changing your narrative, your perspective, your story on what has happened, to radically change the experience. But the past does not exist, right? Nor does the future. All of it exists in here, in our head, in our being, the way that we relate to what has happened. So when we change the way that we relate to it, everything changes. And we can really truly free ourselves from a very, very traumatic past, and learn to then alchemize all of that into service, into art, into how can we create with this energy instead of be imprisoned by it. How can we actually create more freedom with it and help others as well, which I think is a huge part of, if you want to alchemize that energy, is how can you serve with that energy? Then it becomes really, really valuable.
Mm. Oh yeah, to bring it meaning in some way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Something else that I'm curious to touch with you is I know that you and Rachel, both of you, has been very open sharing your story of infidelity and heartbreak and those moments of really sort of trauma within the relationship, and how you have used those moments and those experiences to really get deeper into your relating together. And I'm curious, maybe it doesn't just have to sort of connect to infidelity, but for the people who are experiencing heartbreak in relationships in any way. It could be infidelity, but also, I mean, heartbreak can come from many different sources. Do you have any perspective on how to deal with heartbreak in relationships or within yourself, maybe?
Mm, heartbreak is tough, and I would bring the same analogy here, which we just spoke about, which is, if we view heartbreak as a, instead of my heart is breaking and therefore it's broken and it is bad, it's wrong, it shouldn't be happening, we're screwed if we think of it that way. But if we think of it this way, my heart is breaking open. My heart is actually breaking open in such a way that it can expand, and that I can let the divine in, or I can let more love in. I can experience more love. My life philosophy is that everything is, you have to have contrast, essentially, in order to appreciate the other side. So if you've experienced this massive amount of bliss and love, if you don't know the other side of it, which it maybe feels like loss and grief and feels like death and pain, you wouldn't be able to appreciate the bliss the same way. So again, if we can mm, create a narrative about the heartbreak and embrace it as an opportunity to get grateful for what we experienced before and what will come again, and that we're actually, by our heart breaking open, we created more space for us to experience even more love, with even more awareness, with even more gratitude and joy than ever before. And there's something that happens when in new love, and when people first fall in love, or when we're younger, we have these like rosy glasses on, this idea about how life is. And then the rosy glasses get inevitably broken at some point. And we're very disappointed, we're very sad, and we're very, destroyed by it. However, life is everything. Life is always lifing. And there's, so much like horrible death and, you know, despair and all the things that are happening at the same time as all the beauty. But when we can embrace all of it and know that this is the just the full spectrum of life, you can actually experience more of everything. And that, I believe, is what our spirit, our soul desires. Our human can be very scared of that at first because you're like, oh, it's too much. But it's actually only by when our heart breaks and breaks open that we can experience more of it with so much more compassion and so much more understanding.
Mm. Life is always lifing. I love that.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Um, Before wrapping this conversation up for today, I would love to hear you share a little bit about your method, the pyramid breath, because you're the
Mm.
founder of the pyramid breath. Is there anything, I mean, we've touched upon it, but is there anything you would like to share about the method? Is there a method? Maybe you only share this behind closed doors, but sort of like, is there this a method that we can bring with ourselves at home? Like, how do we tap into the pyramid breath? What's the pillars
Yeah.
and the foundation?
So pyramid breath is really, really profound and powerful because when people mostly think of breath work, they think about, wow, I need like 30 minutes or an hour to do this practice, or sometimes more, and it's done laying down, and you kind of like you leave the body, which again is powerful and helpful and healing. But for most people, it's more like, oh, it's a ceremony, it's a ritual. Maybe I'll do it once a week or once a month or something like that. What's great about pyramid breath is you can do it every day, and you can do it in 5 minutes, and it'll radically, radically, radically shift your state. And because the practice is done seated, you can do it in a chair, or I prefer to sit in Seiza style, like Japanese style, on the floor with cushions, and you can tap into that state of infinite part of you. You get to remember within the first few minutes that you are not your body, you are not your trauma, you are not your mind, you are not your thoughts, you are not your limiting beliefs. It is so incredibly empowering to your life. And even that, those few moments for your nervous system, all your nervous system needs is just a moment to tap out of stress, to reset itself. And that's why pyramid breath I recommend to everyone, And if you go to my Instagram, or you Google pyramid breath, you'll land on my website. There's free videos on YouTube. I have a channel for my audience. People can, put two lives every week. Plus I have like hundreds of pre-recorded videos, short and long and all the things. But ultimately what I desire for folks is to find their own practice. So you don't need me, right? So you can do this practice wherever you are. You guide yourself through it, and you find your freedom every day. It's the greatest gift that you can give yourself daily, because it helps you remember that everything is possible, and that if we live from this place in a win-win-win formula, meaning I benefit, you benefit, the world benefits, life does, my friends, get better and better forever and ever. And that is the truth.
Mm. Love it. I find those words so beautiful to start to wrap this conversation up with. And thank you for sharing those pillars of the pyramid breath. And maybe I will go ahead and put a link to some of those videos for the listeners if they're curious. Joanne, if you were to reach the whole world for just 30 seconds, what would you like to say to them or maybe even do with them?
Mm. Man, if I could get the whole world breathing with me for a couple of minutes, I would love that. And that's a vision of mine actually, is to allow for pyramid breath to become something that people do, like they brush their teeth every day. You know, just something that you do every day. And I would love to get the whole world breathing together, because pyramid breath, I don't call it breath work, I call it breath play or breath pray.
Mm,
And collectively, when we connect every day with the divine, and again, understanding that divine is not somewhere outside of ourselves, divine is within. When we remember that collectively, I believe that we will radically change life on earth. And again, it's not outside of ourselves, everything is an inside job. And so for me, the message is find a way, if it's not pyramid breath, find another practice that allows you to connect with that part of yourself every day. It's so incredibly empowering to realize that you already have it all. You just have to touch it to remember it. And it's a daily practice. Don't do it once, do it once a day, maybe even a couple of times a day. And you will radically, magnificently experience your whole paradigm shift into a life that is legendary and epic. And when you are on your deathbed, you'll be so grateful to have lived versus to go and regret.
mm, yes. And Joanne, before I let you go today, is there any question that I haven't asked you that you would like me to ask you now?
No, I think you've done a great job. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a
Mm,
joy to connect with you. I can see your curiosity and feel your light and love, and just, yeah, appreciating what you're doing. Thank you.
mm. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And also for the listeners, how can they reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
I would say go to Herb Johann at Instagram. It's a good way to find me. Pyramidbreath.com is also a great way to find me. Um, and yeah, come find me and connect. I love connecting with people and practicing with people and sharing what I call a quantum container together. And whenever we practice pyramid breath, we drop into this quantum container together wherever you are in the world, and we can really feel the power of togetherness and what we create together, because the practice is designed to co-create a new vision for ourselves and each other and for this planet. It's just so much better together. So come find me.
Mm.
Let's play. Let's pray. Let's breathe. And let's life have be better and better forever and ever.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.